normally do. Okay, so yes, welcome everyone to this, our Landcare checks in on seed and seedling supply for biodiverse revegetation projects. And I think this is a very popular hot topic. We've got a lot of people who've registered to join the session. So yeah, so we're looking forward to what everyone's got to say and what the panel have got to bring to us today. So to start the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm zooming from Wodjuk country of the Noongar Nation, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the first land carers on this land, and pay my respects to their elders and ancestors, past, present and emerging, who have handed on land care and culture throughout the generations. So, and I know that we're all probably meeting from different spots throughout the country, and yeah, just yeah, we all want to pay our respects. So the first thing today, because we've got quite a big group of us, just some ground rules. If you'd like, if you've not got your name and your organisation on your name panel, you can actually rename yourself by going to the side of the participants panel where the little arrow is, and then you can press more on the side, just hover over the right hand side, and then you can rename yourself. So that might be something you want to do, just so that everyone knows who everyone is. And the other ground rules is, because there's a lot of us here, if you want to ask a question, if you can use the hand up function, which is along the bottom as well. And on the reactions tab along the bottom of your screen, it should be, if you're on a laptop. If you're on a phone, it might be a bit different. Or the other thing you can do is put questions in the chat. So in the chat box on the side. And that will just help us to keep it tight and going well.
Just a quick reminder too, please, to mute. There's already someone typing in the background there, which is fine, but please use your mute button if you can, just so that we've got ability to hear everyone when they're speaking.
Okay, so we'll start off straight away with a Mentimeter segment. If you've been to a few of our Landcare checks in, you'll be familiar that we usually do this segment. If you're not familiar, just grab out your phones and go to www.menti.com. So it's MENTI.com, and use the code that comes up. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the Menti, and you'll see the code. So if you've put www.menti.com in, the code is 92652655. Is anyone having problems? If you're having problems and you want me to call out the number again or the Menti, just let me know. So can everyone see the screen with the WA Landcare Network?
That looks good.
Okay. All right, we'll get going then. Hopefully everyone's got in.
And this is a question just to give us all a sense of who's in the room and what your association is with Reveg. That would be very handy for our panel of speakers too, who I'll introduce shortly.
Yes, so whichever. Hopefully there's a category that fits everyone, but if there's not, you might have to use other, but we've tried to think of as many as we can.
What a great spread.
Yeah, we have. So it looks like NGOs and non-for-profits tops the list at the moment, but we've got...
Can people select two?
No, only one.
Unfortunately.
That's isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. So I guess just select the one that most applies to you.
All right. So
Okay. Yep, so that gives the speakers an idea of who's in the room and everyone else. So should we move to the next question? Oh,
yes.
no, we've still got a couple more coming in. If anyone has still just joined us, just go to www.menti.com, MENTI.com, and use the code 92652655. Okay, hopefully everyone's got that. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question now. Oh, we've still got a couple coming in.
And these results will be available later on to everyone when Kylie shares the recording details. So you get a sense from that as well.
Oh, we've still got a few more coming in. Is there still a few more people being admitted, Jack?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, I think we'll move on to the next question. Okay, so the next question is, what issues with seed or seedling supply on demand are you experiencing? And once again, we've got a few different options there. And with this question, you can answer, I think you can answer 3 responses.
Yes, it's up to 3 on this one.
Yeah, so.
Oh, that was quick. I think we...
If anyone's just joined us, www.menti.com, and the code is 92652655.
And because there's not a box in Menti, unfortunately, for you to note what your other concerns might be, please feel free to put that in the chat and we can raise that when we come to the conversation.
Mm.
Yes, we would love to hear what your others are as well.
Gosh, fabulous.
So acquiring provenance seed has popped up from Julia Cullity from DBCA. Thank you, Julia. So
Wow.
biodiversity is looking like a big issue as we have taken on board from our members.
Mm.
So I
Terrific.
think there was another person that just joined. If the person that just joined, www.menti, if you take out your phone, so that's MENTI.com, and the code is 92652655. Yes, so issues with supply and demand of biodiverse seed and seedlings has come up the winner at the moment, and the availability of quality seed and seedlings. Demand outweighing supply, and we've got 9 others, so it will be interesting to see what they are in the chat. All right, well, we'll leave the Menti for now. We've got a couple of questions at the end, so I'll just stop sharing and come back to the... So now that was just to give the panel speakers an idea of where we all sit and what the issues are. So now I'll introduce the panel. Unfortunately, we've got 2 of our panel that have come down sick today, so that's disappointing, but we've had someone else kindly fill in, which is Keith Bradbury, which I'm sure he's got lots to share with us today, who's the CEO from Gondwana Link, and lots of wisdom. Yeah, unfortunately, Peter Luscombe and Dr. Paul Gibson-Roy aren't able to join us, but we do have Professor Kingsley Dixon, Foundation Director of Science at Kings Park, and he's created the International Network of Seed-Based Restoration and chair of the Society for Ecological Restoration, and a whole lot of other titles, and he's currently with Curtin University, and I'm sure he can tell us more. Yes. And we've also got Damian Grose, who's the Deputy Chair of the Revegetation Industry Association of WA, and he's also with Training, I believe. And Dr. Blair Parsons, General Manager of Science and Design of Greening Western Australia. So thank you very much for all the panel speakers for joining us. And would you like me to read the first question, Jack?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so the first question for our panel is, whose responsibility is it to keep tabs on or watch over the state of supply across the state, given the ever increasing demand? So this is of seed and seedlings, obviously.
Yes.
So who of our panel would like to kick off with that question?
Kingsley? Yeah, look, I was hoping others might step in, but Simon Pedrini, who many people know, works with me very closely, and we co-authored the standards for native seed 2 years ago. He's just in the States doing a full tour of all the seed production and seed quality areas in the States. And we just did a briefing beforehand, before he went to bed. And the really big issue is there are no international or even national bodies that look at native seed and the native seed supply chain and say, hey, quality standards and accreditation. And this is, I think, an issue that's going to come up time and time again. And it's certainly something that we want to take into the federal government, particularly with the new Environment Minister, soon to be announced, around the fact that whether it's restoration or whether it's seed supply, we do need standards, and we do need somebody to oversight the standards, and just so we've got more robust systems. But internationally, so if you're in the EU, yeah, you have very strict standards. That's one of the interesting places, a little bit of variation, but that's all managed through Brussels. But the US is very much dictated by the biggest buyer of native seed, which is the Bureau of Land Management. So they spend about $60 million a year buying native seed. So they have standards that they've imposed in that process. So they're essentially driving, they're pulling that supply and quality capability. So there is that level of oversight, but internationally, very little. Over to my other panel members, please.
Yeah, well, if I could.
Oh, Damian, sorry.
Yeah, if I can just add in, I mean, I guess the only people who really know how much seed is being collected in WA and how much is out there is the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, because we as seed collectors all have to report to them. But I guess that information wouldn't be available to the general public. And no one essentially keeps tabs on what is out there. And I guess all of the seed merchants such as ourselves we have a general indication of what is out there, because if we don't have stuff, we're obviously in communication with other suppliers to see what they've got. So internally, I guess as suppliers, we keep tabs on that, but there's nothing out there to say there's this much available of this in the market and here's where to go and get it. And whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing as well, because if someone knows that they're the only person holding some seed, they could hold the industry to ransom. So yes, whether you would want that to be publicly available information as well.
If I can jump in there, Keith Bradby pretending on Peter Luscombe, who's got the flu. I share that concern of Damian's that if you start regulating this tightly, you'll start buggering up the commercial factors that are critical to build a good restoration economy and industry. But I'd also add that I think there's a systemic problem across the land care sector, is that as in the example just mentioned, you can be doing all sorts of arduous reporting. Lots of detail goes in and it's really hard to get stuff out.
Yep. Blair.
Yeah, just to come back to the original question, I suppose I don't think I'd want to lend an opinion on who necessarily needs to keep a tabs on or oversee this stuff, but I would echo Kingsley's thoughts, I think, about just a bit more clarity and better articulation of standards. Just very simple things like we saw with the last check-in around, I shouldn't say simple, last thing around provenance at the last check-in. It's obviously quite a difficult issue, and it's not necessarily easy for everyone to understand when they're coming in from different areas and points of view. So yeah, someone might need to oversee it, but a bit of stronger guidance and articulation of standards and what we expect collectively would be very useful.
Thank you, Blair. Anyone in the audience want to comment to that? I can see some hands, a hand up there. Let me just see who that is. Oh. Sorry. Just jump in if that person who's indicated.
Sorry, that was me, Jack. Damian again. So yeah,
sorry.
just wearing my Riala hat, so the Reveg Industry Association. And we kind of created that in the first place 19 years ago with the aim to bring together all of the practitioners and the seed collectors and try and create a central forum for that. So I guess that as an association, we would have a fairly good handle of where things are at. And we've also come up with the first system in Australia with accreditation for seed suppliers. So which is based around a standards, a fairly easy to implement standard system that basically gives seed purchasers a good idea of whether they're buying quality seed or not, and knowing that it's all sort of been sustainably harvested. So I guess Riala would be a good port for anyone who is looking for information about the industry.
Excellent. So we can share that in our communications that go out after this. Would you be happy with that, Damian?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Brian's agreeing with comments. There's nothing else in the chat at the moment. So we'll move on to the next question, Kylie.
Okay. So the next question is, how can we encourage and educate organisations, particularly those planting for carbon, to consider a diverse species mix?
Who'd like to grab that, Kingsley?
Well, Jennifer Bradley, who's the method development boss for the Emission Reduction Fund, she presented to our Federal Committee for Threatened Species Conservation this morning. And it's very clear that if we leave it up to carbon to put our version of biodiversity back, it's certainly going to fall well short. You know, it'll be fields of eucalypts, acacias and melaleucas forever. And so there's a really significant issue over biodiversity. Importantly, there are also big issues, as we saw in the poll that you took. Getting hold of the seed is a significant issue, and particularly when we start going to some of the really rich understory, which of course we have about 80% of our biodiversity is understory, and often small understory. Then the seed supply chain becomes quite fractured and lacks robustness. And then this of course goes to the core issue of increasing reliability, which is then going to go to native seed farming, which is a really big and complex topic, because we're mostly dominated by woody understory shrubs, some herbaceous things which are fast maturing. So collectively, the major puller in the space, which is the Emission Reduction Fund, doesn't really understand what biodiverse really means, and they have very loose definitions, and that really has to change if we're going to start getting, I think, true conservation co-benefits through large-scale restoration and carbon plantings.
Thanks, Kingsley. So who's having those conversations and how can we contribute to those, do you think?
those conversations will start. In August, they have a major review of the what they call the planting programs, the environmental plantings methods, but I wouldn't be waiting till then. And I think there needs to be a collective science and NGO push into government to say we need to lead this so that we do get the biodiversity that we are after, particularly for traditional owners. They really want the bush back, and they're getting very weary of seeing the monotony of particularly the wheat belt landscapes that's happening.
Thank you. Keith?
Oh, well, I just second what Kingsley said. I think we've had an appalling regulatory regime and methodology process at the moment. It's giving us all sorts of environmental problems. We've also, before we got on with everyone, we're discussing the difficulty of removing woody weeds and planting with carbon. Can't do it. But I think this is an incredibly important time for, quite possibly led by the Landcare movement, by Wong, another job for you, Jack, to start lobbying at a federal level to get that changed. I'd also add that, you know, a certain amount of the carbon going in is still voluntary carbon. And our experience has been that there's a lot of enthusiasm in the community to do higher biodiversity value. And I think we've come a long way in recent years with the restoration standards, but I'm keen for us to go further so that we can at least inject greater clarity into the industry, and people paying for carbon can look at what the contractors are doing and say, "Oi, come back here a minute. How good is that?"
Yes.
But there are supply issues too, of course.
Yes. Blair, do you want to comment there?
Yeah, I would. How can we encourage a more diverse mix? At the broader scheme of things, I think we need to also be ready for the fact that the biodiversity market is actually coming. And this is something where nature will be valued explicitly rather than carbon only, which is a particular thing that we are using to fuel biodiversity progress. Biodiversity in itself will be the impact that people are trying to buy. So we need to actually link to those credit markets. We need biodiversity to be valued using a common metric. So something like accounting for nature is seemingly one of the emerging techniques that we can do that sort of stuff. But that's quite complicated. So closely linked to that, I think what we need is just clear and simple explanations of what quality restoration actually is. I'm looking at you, Keith. So maybe a document for WA that just sums that up quite simply. It can actually hold people to a common yardstick. That would be really useful. But then to come back to the regulatory environment that exists at the moment with carbon, at the moment it ignores, or more to the point, it prevents thinking around succession and moving from one state through transition to another. It basically encourages set and forget plantings. And that's a problem if we actually want to see understory, if we want to see diversity and things develop through time. So if we were to put something in our recommendations, Kingsley, maybe that would be one.
Yeah, and Blair, to add to that, the silliness that people aren't even allowed to collect seed from a carbon planting. I mean, really, if we put all the seed together, you know, that's probably going to be 2 to 3 tons of seed, which is nothing compared to the 163,000 tons that Woodside produces per day of carbon dioxide. So, yeah, I think this is where I think we have to wake up the whole ERF, get biodiversity co-benefits really valued with real market value, and get the whole system.
And also maybe stop saying co-benefits. I think these things are fundamental pillars to, you know, resilient and well-buffered ecosystems. So they're not an optional add-on that you just tick the box for.
Agree.
Terrific. Can I come to a question from Carbon Positive and then perhaps to you, Damian, for comment?
So one of the as an organisation who plants for carbon but wants to do it in a biodiverse way, one of the real sticking points is actually being able to source the quantity required to do the large-scale restoration projects. And because there's no legal framework or no restoration standard framework, those who are planting carbon for profit, which is obviously their end goal, are able to monopolize the supply chain and essentially do that based on five key species.
Yeah.
And so even when you're trying to do the right thing, it becomes extremely impossible to do the right thing unless you're able to, have access to nursery space. So yeah, I just wanted to put that in the mix because it's a genuine issue.
Thank you very much. Damian?
Yeah, I guess to sort of just answer that last sort of question, I guess seed supply is very labour intensive and it's also dictated by the weather. So, and it has a lead time as well, like to be able to build up to scale to be able to deliver large quantities of seed, you need to be thinking several years down the track. It's not just, oh, let's go to the market. They're going to have that sitting on the shelf waiting for me, which generally isn't the case, except for a couple of common species, and they're the ones that are in demand. So it used to be that seed collectors would speculate and they'd find good patches of things and then they'd stockpile them. But these days, everything is pretty much done to order. So if you can, put it out there that you've got future projections for needing this much seed of these species, then people will go out and, they can actually gear up to target those things.
Yeah.
But may not do so if the demand isn't there at this point in time, then they're probably not geared up for it.
Yep.
And Damian, it's really interesting. I get lots of people saying, oh, you can't grow that from seed and you can't grow this from seed. Yeah, Western Australia probably has the highest proportion of what we'd call germination problem species of almost any other biome on the planet. But, the solutions are happening. So Petunia has now been totally cracked. So you can grow beautiful snotty gobbles in abundance. There's apparently soon to be an announcement that we've broken the Ericaceae terrible dormancy issues. And, there you put those two together and suddenly you're starting to talk about real bush coming back. So I think we're in exciting days, but it's still going to come down to the supply chain and ultimately those restoration plantings, those carbon plantings as future seed resources. And I think that's where, particularly for traditional owners who will be some of the largest landholders in the southwest, they want to use degraded land in innovative ways, allowing them to get the carbon benefits and biodiverse plantings and to then use those as a seed resource, I think is just a really smart way for us to build what's going to be probably a 10-year lead on improving that robust biodiverse seed supply chain.
Yep.
Thank you,
Can I
Kingsley.
add? Oh, well, again, if Peter Luscombe was here instead of me, he'd be reiterating just plan ahead, and plan ahead. And of course, we all know that in both the commercial world and with, government-funded land care projects, that's pretty bloody difficult at the moment. But, as an ex-seed collector, you have some years where you can literally get some stuff by the ton quite effectively and cheaply. But we did used to stockpile, as Damian said, because you knew sometime in the next 5 or 10 years someone would want it. You just had to store it properly. So I'm wondering whether we also need to look for some economic mechanisms that encourage the seed and nursery industry to work a number of years ahead of present demand. And much harder with seedlings and nurseries, I think. I can see how it would work for seeds, but we've got to stop this short-termism.
Yep, fully agree.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Bruce, who's one of our committee members, Bruce Ivers, one of the original people who raised this concern. Bruce, do you just wanted to give us a little bit of feedback about the comments you've heard to date about the issues that were of concern to your community group?
Thanks, Jack. Nice to see everybody there, and nice to hear your comments too. Look, fabulous comments from everybody. One of the points that's come up for me as listening to everybody is we seem to be focusing quite a lot on seed. And my experience with working with nurseries is that there's a huge range of quality of seedlings produced by different nurseries. And I wonder if there are some sets of guidelines, because you've been talking about guidelines, for good quality seedling production and actually getting nurseries to do that. The quality of seedlings makes a huge difference to a re-veg project. So would anybody like to comment on that?
I think we should ask Mr. Plantright, David Lawford. Come on.
Steve Blythe has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologise for coming in late. For those that don't know me, Steve Blythe, I work for Green Life Industries Australia, but previous to that, I was a nurse. I owned Blythe Tree Farm and Garden Centre down in Katanning. For 20 years, grew seedlings for revegetation programs, also on the board of the South West Catchments Council. And so, you know, a lot of you I've worked with, Keith, yourself, and so I understand this, I believe, this area quite well. There is a program, but it is, it's accreditation. And this is what I'm doing at the moment, been doing it for 4 years, is working with businesses, nurseries, to improve their production systems using the 20 years experience that I have, being able to go back in and revisit what accreditation is about, and being able to guide them, I think, if I can be so bold to say, guide them in ways of improving their production facilities. Sorry, not facilities, their production systems. And it is becoming quite a, at the start it's a big problem because there were lots of bad habits. I spend a lot of my time talking to TAFEs and lecturers trying to get rid of some of the bad habits that I'm seeing that are coming out of there. Some of the nurseries are using old systems that are not efficient and are producing a product that is not suitable. Well, it's not the best quality. And so I'm spending a lot of time doing that. I also wanted to, so there is that program happening, and the nursery industry through the project that I'm delivering is helping in that space. You know, I'm doing mini tech courses on pH and EC readings and media supply, water holding capacity of water, fertilizing regimes, all of those sorts of things. We've got a sub-program that's for landscape tree specification, which drills down into trying to get nurseries to revisit their procedures on pricking out and trying to stop the J rooting. So, you know, there's a lot happening in this space, and I'm enjoying delivering that. And so if you've got any issues with nurseries, please get in touch with me and let me use the program and my 20 years experience to see what I can do to help in that space.
Thank you, Steve. That's encouraging.
Sorry?
I said, thank you. That's very encouraging to hear. And I'm sure people can get your details through us if they can't otherwise.
Yep, thank you. Look, the other thing that there is another issue that you all need to be aware of, and it is to do with potting mix. Potting mix is becoming the supply of potting mix is becoming an issue, and you need to be aware of that. Particularly the carbon companies that are looking at, you know, wanting 8-10 million seedlings a year. We don't have the potting mix to supply that sort of growth. We used to, back in the early 2000s when we were doing blue gum plantations, and there was an amazing organisation called WAFTN, the WA Farm Tree Nurseries Association. There were 21 nurseries in that association. We were producing over 90 million seedlings a year. So we had the capacity. Now, since the cycle of government carbon trading, the whole NHT2, NHT1's collapse, we only have 7 nurseries that were part of that organisation are still running. And so we still do not have, and now we still cannot supply enough potting mix, composted pine bark. We are getting nurseries here in Western Australia are actually having to import it from South Australia. So that is a real issue, and I know that because I audit the media suppliers for NIASA, the 3 suppliers. I know that because our current government has changed some of their policies, and the harvesting regimes have changed as well. So the ability to get that resource is becoming quite difficult. So just put that one in your box and have a think about that later. How can we deal with that one? So
Thank you, Steve.
I'll stay up, but please, I'll put my contact details on the chat, and I'm here for the industry.
Thank you. And we have a question from Kingsley. Is David Lovefitz from PlantRight able to give us a response, please?
Yeah, I'll address a couple of things, if that's okay, around seedling quality and biodiversity. I think it's easy to produce monocultures in volume of seedlings. So, you know, like pine plantations, blue gums and so on, can you get a very uniform seedling happening? When it comes to doing such a wide range of biodiverse species for conservation, reforestation or restoration projects, it adds a complexity level to the propagation, management and growing. And Kingsley and I have spoken about this, it's almost an art form as well. You can only systemize so much within a nursery, and then it really comes down to who is actually looking after that plant, who is growing it, who is monitoring it, who is doing nutrition, pest and disease control, and so on for a 6-month period. And to be honest, it's really hard to have the next generation of nursery people coming through with that eye for detail, that passion for detail, and the industry doesn't pay well. Like, we're talking entry-level labour. It's not that kind of glamorous job. You're out in the sun, rain, dirty, sweaty. It's sort of like seed picking. I probably think seed picking is a little bit worse than nursery work. So attracting and retaining good talent of people who know how to grow plants is probably the biggest challenge the nursery industry faces, apart from potting mix supply. Steve?
So what we're hearing is that, you know, we really, and this is a precursor conversation to obviously a forum on this, because we're hearing that we've got to do some federal intervention. We're hearing there's major issues in supply chain at the state level. There's a quality control issue. There's lots of stakeholders in the conversation who've got something to contribute. So at the end of our conversation today, we'll try to gather your interest in participating in a forum. What are the things you'd like raised? And I can certainly see that in Wallen's advocacy role, there's a lot for us to look at here in terms of how do we get something in place that's very strategic, that we're looking at, you know, 5 to 10, 15 years ahead, that doesn't impact negatively on commercial operations. That's not what we want to do, but we want to look at how we can keep a sense that supply demand will be able to be met, as well as quality going forward. Are there any comments from the audience before we go to the next question, please? No one? Okay, Kylie.
Okay, so we're up to...
Sorry, Keith?
Can I just jump in quickly? Sorry. A quick question for David and Steve, and possibly someone from Katanning or elsewhere, and quick answers are fine. But given the need to be more locally focused with biodiverse plantings, is there a greater role, an admirer of plant right and David's focus on biodiversity, but is there a bigger role for Landcare groups to be running local nurseries that can respond quicker to local planting projects and, you know, the mix of species locally?
I think it's very dangerous if you take, I mean, it just waters down our profession and our professionalism to take it back to community groups. They've got a role to play, no doubt, in small projects. But what we really need to deliver quality biodiverse projects on scale is lead time and good seed supply, and working with, you know, with good collectors too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Can I go to Mary next? Are you finished there, David? Sorry.
Can I just follow up on that? I don't know if you're aware of the nursery Nuts About Natives, and they only grow plants on contract, and they go to the site to get their propagules or seeds for where it's going to be planted. So in bushland, you know, restoration, yeah, they only go to site to get there, so that the biodiversity is what's at the site. They're not bringing in plants from elsewhere and so on. So so they're specialists. They don't retail. They only grow stuff on contract.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. We can share.
Wildflower Society, first branch of last year or sometime. Yeah, really impressive. They're ex-CSIRO research scientists, so they're very good at growing stuff.
Can I also say, because I deal with New South Wales TAFE and their education system, their horticulture programs are jam-packed with young people coming through. But I look at our TAFE programs here and where those people end up. And I guess, David, you know, you can comment, are we producing the quality, the caliber, and are we in stimulating people who have that natural interest in plants and growing, which, you know, everyone on this call does. That's why we're all here, because I don't see it happening so well here. If I go to Broome, where Kim Courtney's running his horticulture program, it's really dynamic and fabulous because he's got skin in the game and doing it really well and has Indigenous students and the rest of it. So I still see the TAFE system is not really engaged with this. It's very cookie cutter, standard B grade horticultural textbook stuff, which is okay, but we need to go to the next level if we're going to satisfy WA's unique plant needs.
Thank you, Kingsley. We'll put that in our notes for discussion. And I can see Deb from DWER badly taking notes there. And Steve, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, if I could just make a couple of comments. One, Keith, in terms of local groups. Well, first, David, I do agree with you. Lead time is the most important thing to grow a product. Community nurseries, there are some very successful community nurseries now, well, and always has been. There are more coming along. I'm working with some of the Noongar groups, Tambalup, Noangarup. Then we've got the Noongar Land Enterprise Group, Northam. There's some of the, even the Northern Territory, I'm working up in there with.
Oh, sorry, Steve, we've got a problem with the audio. You're muted. Can you unmute?
Am I there now?
Yeah, that's better. And look, we'll give you a moment and then we've got to move on to the next question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think there is room, as long as in community nurseries, as long as there's training there, which goes back to your point, Kingsley. I agree in terms of our TAFE, and I am spending a lot of time with lecturers, Albany, Bunbury, Murdoch, Geraldton, Kalgoorlie, and
thank you.
Showing them the resources and things and getting them upskilled as much as we can.
Great. Okay, just conscious of time, we're getting fairly close here. Kylie, our next question, please.
Okay, the next question is, how can the landcare sector ensure supply of seeds and seedlings with increasing revegetation, rehab and carbon projects?
Look, I do think we've spoken to some of that in roundabout ways with the other questions and answers. And I think we clearly need a forum. We need some conversations with government. We need some planning. We need to have some input into various stages of the supply cycle, starting back at how do we recruit and train people, the quality that comes out the other end. We've touched on quite a bit of that. Is there any points from... One? Yeah, unless anyone wants to speak specifically to that question.
It's just Blair here. I'll just say super quickly. I think we need better access to the seed itself. So just reiterating that access to seed on carbon plantings would be a handy way of doing that. Potentially some access to seed on state land where currently picking is difficult. And then just maybe plugging some geographic gaps. So we should probably have a bit of a look at where the demand is coming from. So if this biodiverse carbon industry is going to be around for a little while, we can do a bit of thinking about where are those carbon projects going to hit, and do we have any seed resource? Do we have any seed pickers out there? And do we have nurseries producing with a heads up on that demand? So all of that leads to really strong signal and lead times, as the guys have already mentioned.
Okay, and we've heard that, you know, one of the issues we have around that strong lead time is the funding cycle, project development and delivery, short-term projects, longer-term projects needing more lead time. And so we have to talk to government and funding bodies about that component as well. We need to be planning much further ahead. Okay, our final question.
Yes, final question is, what support do the community landcare and commercial nurseries need to supply the sector?
So who would that person be? It comes back to our first question. I think we've clarified that there isn't an overarching sense of responsibility sitting anywhere in the state around this. I don't think we came to a conclusion about who that could, would or should be. Maybe, you know, I might say that DBCA and DWER would be part of a conversation to look at how we clarify that going forward. Then that might tell us about what sort of, where support could come from. What sort of support would agencies be able to provide in what seems to be a cash-strapped environment? And what sort of support are you looking for to be able to do your job better? Any comments? Nothing in particular?
Maybe it's Blair here again. Just coming from a Greening Australia perspective, we would desperately love to see more diversity in our mix, and we think that's difficult, and Kingsley's explained a few reasons why. So I'd like to ask the question of the nurseries is, would more research and development on expanding the list, you know, rather than having the select few things available, how can we make more stuff available? Would that be useful? Because we would have a very strong market for it.
And Blair, that's what I was going to say. Putting off my university hat and putting on my gardener's hat, we have to break this problem that we have, that science to solve horticultural problems seems to be at the pace of science and is often producing quite, I think, field irrelevant outcomes with a little bit of benefit in there. And that comes down to the broken university system, which I'm challenging Curtin now, that we're based on metrics that aren't about practical benefit. And we're saying with our new Australian Research Council grant, which starts on 1 August, about, you know, the restoration economy for Indigenous Australians, we're really saying we have to ensure that actually getting more biodiverse plantings year by year by year is actually a key science outcome, not how many papers we got in Nature and Science, which is currently why science, I think, underwhelms you guys. And I see lots of fabulous nursery people. And yeah, Ben Croxford, I go and chat to him because he does things. And I go, wow, that'd be great to do a bit of completion research to understand why those seeds did that or why that tissue culture worked. So I think we need a different way of applying the science. I like to call it science into practice, some new term that means you just don't get people writing flash grant proposals, but really practically focused, outcome driven, demand driven research in the true sense.
Great, thank you. Carbon positive.
So one of the things that, you know, from an on the ground perspective, I couldn't agree with Kingsley more in terms of, you know, it'd be great to see it in practical action out on the ground. But one of the things that we see as an issue is there is that lack of liaison between the nurseries about who's doing what, when, how, why. So there's quite a disparate kind of, it feels like it's quite disparate at times, the industry between the different players. And so one of the things that we'd really like to see is some form of coordination, so that, you know, we're relying on the market essentially to provide the capacity that we need. And I'm not sure that the market economics of this is really working out, and that it maybe needs some form of intervention, particularly in terms of the more rare, you know, the more rare understory species. I think, you know, the market can probably sort out the more common stuff, but when you get down to actually doing very complex restoration projects, there's probably more intervention needed in order to be able to obtain that capacity.
Yeah, I would just jump in. I'd agree with Louise. I think until it needs to be market driven, until until projects are compelled to put those hard varieties in, no one's going to spend the money on a $3 seedling versus you know, a 60-cent seedling, and that's the level of complication, complexity that's involved in some of those propagation things. So
yeah, but David, I'd also add that if we could move away from making those $3 plants your core business by turning the 60-cent one into a different production system, say better direct seeding, that's going to work, we would then actually drive the business, because currently I think capacity is overwhelmed by the volume of the, let's say, the easy species.
Thank you, Kingsley. Look, there's a comment here too from Brett Loney about should seed picking from land permitted for clearing have a permit condition attached that all seed is picked before clearing. Now that's another element and another layer of this, where the whole statutory system comes into play about the impacts of seeds that we're losing through clearing. Now, as you're aware, I've learned so much today. It's a far more complex and multi-layered conversation. We're working up towards a forum. We're going to move to the closing Mentimeter session, and I'll hand you over to Kylie.
Okay. Right, so I'm just going to share my screen again, and if you weren't with us before, if you joined later, just get out your phones and go to www.menti.com. Most people should already have it, menti.com, and the number is 92652655. You should be able to see that now on your screen. Okay, and we'll go to the next question, which is, would you be interested in attending a workshop or forum to further discuss this topic? And if so, where?
Okay, so as we've moved back into a world where we're more likely to be able to get face-to-face, it looks like we've got some diversity of need here. So we'll keep that in mind in planning a forum, whether there's opportunities to do a bit of a roadshow or to obviously have some electronic participants as well. There's a predominance of Metro there, which constantly happens. It doesn't mean that Wallen isn't always focused on looking at what works for our regional partners, members and stakeholders as well.
There's a few weak ones and a couple of norths. So
great. and you'll have an opportunity to have further input into that. Next slide.
Okay, so everyone's got that one. All right, we'll move to the next slide, which is the last one. So briefly, what issues would you like to see on the agenda of such a workshop or a forum? So I think you can write a couple of things, but try and keep it fairly brief, but just telling us what you'd like to see on the agenda.
Okay. We've got some work to do, Kylie. Another big forum to pull together. Excellent. Look at that.
Yeah, lots of things.
Thanks, Mary. Yes, we've got your nuts about natives noted there, and Keith has supported Kingsley's comment on more outcome-focused research needed. So we've got that whole chain. A shared database platform for all in restoration would be a good start. What a great thought. And the question's going to come to who's going to fund these things. Government may well say, look, this is a commercial supply chain issue. It's really nothing to do with us. We want to have that conversation with them. So by coming to the forum or supporting it in some way, you can make a contribution to that.
Okay, there's still a few comments coming through.
You will receive these comments in your pack that comes out after the session is finished. Thank you everyone for participating. As I said, I've learned a lot today. There's a tremendous amount of concern and need, and I don't see the temperature cooling at all on demand over the next few years. So we really do need to have these conversations. Thank you to our guest speakers very much. Keith Bradbury from Gondwana Link, Damian Grose from Trannan and Riawa, Kingsley Dixon, thank you very much for joining us. And I feel like I've forgotten someone, Blair Parsons from Greening Australia. Any closing comments from anyone?
I've got one. When everyone's had their finishing closing comments. Has anyone got?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thanks for the opportunity to speak. And if you need any more information about the re-veg industry, come to our website. There's a wealth of resources there, especially when it comes to seed purchasing. There's seed quality standards on there. There's also seed collection training module that's on there that's free for anyone to access. So if you want to learn about seed collection and all of the stages and how to do it well, feel free to come to the site.
Thank you, Damian. That sounds fantastic, and we'll do some resource sharing around that. We'll get in touch with you first and see what's the appropriate way to do that, but they sound like great resources. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you once again, everyone, for attending. Just to let you know that our next Landcare Checks In will be a build skills, and it will be a scoping of what we need to build skills in data collection and management across community land care and NRM. So that's coming up on the Wednesday, the 29th of June at 1:30. So, and it'll be online again. So just letting you know about that one. And thank you once again, everyone, for attending. And I'll send out a follow-up email in a few days, probably with some of the links and more information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Keith.
We'll stay on, Kylie. Stay on, Blair, if you don't mind. And Deb, if you wanted to have a little chin. We're nearly all closed out.
So just before I go, Jack, just to give you, you're asking about figures about how much seed we collected.
Yes.
So I've got statistics from last November. So we've collected 5.3 tonnes of seed from 1,175 species over our 20 years of